keep your rifle by your side, singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us, singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough, so we'll take a stand, 'cause we must protect our land, keep your rifle by your side. They'll come day and they'll come night, they'll have our children in their sights, but if they don't have faith, their eyes are blind.
They can scream and they can shout, but they can never smoke us out.
Keep your rifle by your side, singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us, singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When we hear the voice, we know we have no other choice. Keep your rifle by your side.
They'll have bombs and they'll have tanks, 'cause they've got money in their banks. But we won't fall as long as we can fight.
They'll go on to preach their hate, but they won't get past the gate. Keep your rifle by your side, singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us, singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When I see your face, I know I must protect my place. I'll keep my rifle by my side, singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us, singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When I see your face, I know I must protect my place. I'll keep my rifle by my side, keep my rifle by my side, keep your rifle by your side.
Hey, all right. Here we go. The very nearly done with Tragedy and Hope now. Apologies for the delay in the stream getting started. What happens in Tragedy and Hope is the further on Quigley gets, the longer the chapters are. So this is the second to last chapter, and it's like 70 or 80 pages in my book, which in the regular edition is like 150 pages, or 120 pages, because my edition's like massively blown out to the margins, and I compared my edition's like 900 pages, 830 pages, and the original edition was like 13 or 1400 pages. So this is a long chapter. I'm skipping a lot. Jeff, are you there, by the way?
I am here. Yes.
Hello. Sorry, I'm eager not to hit the ground running. You're feeling better, are you? Getting better?
I mean, yeah, it's all relative.
All right. Well,
yeah. I'm at the phase where it's like one wrong move and spend the next 2 hours in pain, but otherwise, I'm pretty good.
I'm sure everybody's sending you prayers and thoughts and all that.
Yeah, much appreciated. Thank you.
So one of the things to say is the last couple of chapters, especially the last two, from 1950 to 1964, right? For chapter 18 is 1950 to 57, 19 is 57 to 64. They're not perfect. They're not as good as the initial chapters because Quigley is still too close to these events. There's understanding and information about these events that's come out, and I like, for example, in the previous chapter, he really knocks McCarthy. I think with some perspective, he would have actually come to see that what McCarthy was trying to do made a lot of sense, right? But a lot the liberal people, coastal types, didn't like McCarthy and what he was doing. He looked like a bully. Quigley is a coastal kind of guy, but he's conservative. I think he's a sort of like maybe the kind of Republican that would have voted for Kennedy, right? You know, what we might think of today as a rhino, pretty centrist, but I think he would have been a bit more, or maybe a conservative Democrat. He writes very approvingly of a lot of Democrats and quite critically of the Republicans. I think, but I think he, you know, he's not socialist. He's not a socialist. He can see the problems with socialism. Anyway, that's just to give an example. So the part of the problem we have in these later chapters is they're not so great. I mean, there's interesting information in here, and there's interesting things to remember about what the world looked like in 1966, and how in 66 they were looking at the past 10 years. It's really easy to sit here in 2024 and think about, like, well, you know, they're in the middle of the Cold War. Quigley thinks the Cold War is sort of coming to an end in 66. So that's an interesting perspective. So there's some interesting perspectives to be had in this chapter. But I'm going to skim over a lot that I don't think is really relevant. I was going to have in the last bit of chapter 18, but I looked at it again and I just thought this is not super relevant. It's a lot of stuff about like Asia and details about like Iran and Vietnam, and it's interesting, but I realized, you know, it's a bit outside the remit Jeff gave me. It's not super relevant to this, like, giving an insight into the regime that we're living with. So I'm not going to deal with that. And likewise, I'm not going to deal with a lot of the details in this chapter, which again are a lot of stuff about East Asia, but also Latin America and Africa. East Asia I'm not really going to deal with. There's a good chance I'm going to do a China episode, Quigley on China, where I take all the bits and pieces that he talks about China and put them into a single episode. I don't know when that's going to happen, and that might not be a live stream. That might just be me doing a little something that I do by myself. So I'm not going to deal with that. But I am going to talk a little bit about Latin America, and I'm going to talk about Africa insofar as it comes under the section on the end of colonialism. And
now, you titled today's lecture "Cuban Missile Crisis and the End of European Empires." Are those two things related?
They're related insofar as in one little detail that in some ways the French and the British, not the governments, but like for example, like the Labour Party is not in government in Britain at the time. Quigley makes a little reference that like the British government was on side with America during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but the Labour government was, the opposition party, Labour, was very eager to sort of make hay out of this and say, like, because a lot of what America criticized the British for doing in Suez, the British are able to turn around and say to the Americans, yeah, you're doing the same thing. De Gaulle, likewise, kind of, in this time period, makes life difficult for the Americans, mainly because they're making life difficult for him. And he sort of says, like, you know, I'm not interested in putting French assets under NATO command when I don't have any input in what happens in NATO activity outside of Europe. And the French are dealing with the fall of Vietnam and with the fall of French Africa, particularly Algeria. So it's very much all wrapped up together, but I'm not going to try and bring the two together other than to say they're happening at the same time. And they're happening at this last historical chapter, right? This is the end of Quigley's history. this today. Next week is his little postscript, not little, his postscript chapter on where he thinks the world is going. So the two are happening in this period 57 to 64, and other than what I've just told you, that little brief gloss, there's some overlap, but not really. Not explicitly in Quigley's thing. Incidentally, just very quickly, I hope you will be happy to hear that I have not sitting in the creaky chair. So if you hear any creakiness tonight, it's the guy who lives above me creaking away. So as I talked about last time, Korea. The Korean War kicks off. It's a UN military activity because the Chinese and the Russians are not, engaged. They boycott the UN. Eisenhower's team with the two brothers, Dulles, Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles. How Eisenhower is sort of almost like an absentee president of this cabinet of very strong-willed individuals. And then Khrushchev, the rise of Khrushchev. Khrushchev gives that speech where he denounces Stalin. Mao hears about the speech and says, Khrushchev is a revisionist. And he falls out with Khrushchev. He sort of pulls China away. Interestingly, when Mao dies, Deng comes in. And Deng gives a very similar speech, or at least publishes something which has a very similar title to Khrushchev's speech. Khrushchev's speech was like something like "On the Dangers of the Cult of Personality," and Deng gives a very similar speech, which is like how Mao's cult of personality was bad. So these sorts of these guys who come in after the first communist leader, both of them see like, this was maybe a bit dangerous and led to a bit too much loss of life that would have been beneficial to the system. And we're going to hear a bit more about Khrushchev today. Today, Latin America and Cuba, a bit about the space race in there, and the end of the European empires. So, yeah. All right. So here we have Kennedy in front of some, what I believe I was looking for, intermediate range ballistic missiles. Clearly tells us that we get through the period of 1953 to 1963 kind of by the skin of our teeth. He says it's the most dangerous decade in human history up till then, right? Reminder, Quigley's writing in 1966. But we get through it by good luck and good sense. He says something interesting in a few, in the chapter. He says the Cuban Missile Crisis, a lot of people think about as like this disaster, but actually the Cuban Missile Crisis was a model in how to handle things. Kennedy is not an ideologue, and Kennedy doesn't play the madman. Reagan and Nixon sort of play the madman with the Soviets, and the Soviets are sort of afraid of them. But Kennedy is very sensible. There's an opportunity at the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis for Kennedy to ruin Khrushchev's reputation, because Khrushchev sends this letter to Kennedy, like by courier, and it's all over the place. And you can apparently read Khrushchev's nervousness and worry through this letter, because he's not worried about the Americans. He's worried about what the Politburo is going to do to him if the wrong thing happens. And Kennedy could have released this letter, but Kennedy goes, no, I kind of understand Khrushchev. We look back on them and we kind of think these guys were rivals. I suspect that Khrushchev and Kennedy really understood one another and kind of liked each other in this sort of like lonely as heavy weighs the crown, lonely as this position, and they sort of had there was some sort of understanding between the two of them. Cartoons like this sort of from the time don't really capture that. So of course, I don't know when that is, but presumably from the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there's a couple of things to say. There's two sort of phases in this period, 1953 to 1964. The first half is sort of not really the first half, but from 1953 to 56, the emphasis in Soviet and American nuclear policy is getting a bigger bomb. So they go from the atomic bomb to hydrogen bombs, which are bigger, more powerful per pound. And then from 56 to 62, the emphasis goes from not a new type of bomb. I think they realize with the hydrogen bomb this is good enough, but more the delivery systems of this bomb. And they have from 56 to 62, the emphasis is on what are called IRBMs, which are intermediate range ballistic missiles. And these are really dangerous. And why are these dangerous? Why are these more dangerous than ICBMs, which don't really come online as like a credible weapon until 62 onwards? Well, the reason is because it encourages you to engage in acquiring position next to the other superpower in order to put an IRBM into their backyard. So if you look at this map, these were the three main deployments of IRBMs by the Americans in Europe. So you have the Thor missile system in the UK and the two Jupiter missile systems in Turkey, in Turkey and Italy. Incidentally, there is an excellent movie on the Cuban Missile Crisis. I love this movie. It's Kevin Costner. I think it's like 13 Days or something like that. I'm gonna look that up. Or Renegade. If you can look that up for me, I'd appreciate that. So I don't interrupt the stream to look it up. It's the Kevin Costner Cuban Missile Crisis movie. Excellent movie. And they talk about this, right? At one point, Robert Kennedy is engaging in some back-channel conversation with the Soviet ambassador, and he sort of says, look, we've got these Jupiter missiles in Turkey. We'll withdraw them if you withdraw from Cuba. And they were planning to be withdrawn anyway because they're already kind of becoming obsolete. But what I want you to see on this map is that period of 1958. The Americans are driving nuclear weapon deployment up to the Russian border. The Russians are not really able until Cuba to do anything similar. And once again, we're stuck in this sort of these two themes that we're kind of living with today, which is, if America does it, it's okay. But and also America pushing the envelope with Russia. I don't think America needed to threaten Russia. And one of the things that comes out the other end is it's obvious to the world in 1963 that America is more powerful than Russia. And the Russians are terrified of the Americans. We talk about it as if like the Russians are a bunch of like Soviet supermen in terms of their mentality of we're going to break, like the way we treat Russians in the Cold War is as if they're Drago from Rocky IV, and they're just looking at Americans going, I will break you. The Russians were terrified. The Russians had been through the bloodiest conflict in history. They had lost a huge percentage of their population. And I think a lot of them were like, yeah, well, sure, I don't love the Soviets, I don't love the communists, but I'm exhausted, and I just want to get on with my life. I just want to build something, and I think the statement of like their irreligion, their secularism is overdone. I had an Orthodox priest tell me once that he saw this. This was before he was a Catholic priest who became an Orthodox priest. And before he became an Orthodox priest, he saw this documentary about Orthodoxy. And it was like a BBC crew or something that had gotten into Russia in the 80s. And they were interviewing villagers. And they said to the villagers, or what are you guys? Are you good atheists, or are you? And the villagers are like, no, we're Orthodox. And the BBC crew says, well, how can you be Orthodox? You don't have priests, you don't have Bibles. And they went, well, okay, come here. And they took them to this little basement that was hidden away in the village that had some icons. And they said, as long as we have these icons, we have the faith. And that I think is very indicative across Russia that they wouldn't. We think about them in our terms. They're very dehumanized, but I think that's happening today with dehumanizing Russians. And the irony of it is that all those good progressives are the ones who are dehumanizing Russians. Despite what they'd have us think, which is that it's actually conservatives who dehumanize people. It's the liberals that are laughing at drones killing Russian soldiers in Donbass and Luhansk. Jeff, I hear you unmuting yourself.
Yes, I was just gonna say that. I gotta get handed to communists for being able to put on a very brave face. They have this way of presenting bravado. I was seeing some quotes earlier from Che Guevara during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where he said, "Yeah, the USA wouldn't dare to attack us because they would probably lose." So the Russians are very good at pumping their own tires, or the communists are very good at pumping their own tires.
Well, we're gonna talk about that because I bet. Che probably actually did think that, because when we get to Latin America,
right.
When we get to Latin America, we'll talk about this. But the Russians, at one point, Castro applies to join the Warsaw Pact, and the Russians are like, "Fuck no, we don't," because we know what you're gonna do if we admit you to the Warsaw Pact. You have to trust this implicit world communism brotherhood that we're going to protect you. We are not going to admit you to the Warsaw Pact where we formally are guaranteeing your independence. If you remember very early on that deleted scene about the sort of the Latin America and this bravado that's like a combination of like Arab and Catholic and sort of influences that move on. That is very present in this chapter. We'll talk about it later, but it quickly calls it the Pakistan to Peru axis. That there's this behavior along that line that is very destructive. It's not as destructive as Africa, but we'll get to that. So the intermediate missiles are very dangerous because you start looking for places to put them as close to your enemy as possible, and you can see it in these maps, right? The way these three systems could reach well into the Warsaw Pact and even to Moscow. So significant places. Now, as a European, you should be saying to yourself, wait a minute, what the fuck? Because what America was doing was treating Europe as a shield. against the Soviets. And guess what? They're doing it again, guys. They are doing it again. The Americans are deploying nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom for the first time in a long time. They are sending them over here in order to strike Russia. Why? Because Russia needs gay marriage. And it's all just a whole bunch of bullshit. Yeah. So, and incidentally, they sign in 1988. Khrushchev and Reagan signed a very significant agreement banning the use of these IRBMs, which America pulled out of in 2019. The Russians really wanted to keep the IRBM treaty because they know what it represents. It's a much bigger threat to the Russians than it is to the Americans. And the Americans said, we're going to pull out. Pompeo did that. I don't know if Trump really understood it, but I don't want to fall into the mistake of defending Trump. Yeah, absolutely. In all things, I just think he's better than the alternative. So, yeah. So the U.S. withdrawal these. Oh no, that's about the Test Ban Treaty. Now. What is this? What's this? But it's the acquiring of ICBMs that change things, and off the back of what? Well, Jeff, you know who this is, right? Easy one. Actually, Jeff, don't answer. Renegade, do you know who this is? Or Sensible Zoomer? Any guess? Yeah, this is Werner von Braun, and that is a V-2 rocket which was fired at the English, and the Americans and the Soviets and the British get a hold of German scientists. The Americans call it Operation Paperclip. And Operation Paperclip is often talked about in like, oh, we have Nazi scientists, and like the implication is that like the guys who they got were evil. Now I don't know what to make of that, and I have to do more reading on Operation Paperclip. I don't know that Werner von Braun was not like marching people into gas chambers. I think the worst thing you can say about Werner von Braun is he was using slave labor, and he knew he was using slave labor, but I don't know the extent to which he did or did not know what was going on. But they kind of like weirdly, like liberals try to like demonize the space program because of this. Werner von Braun is an interesting guy. And what is interesting about Operation Paperclip is not like, oh, Nazis bad sort of thing, but the occult stuff that goes on with it. Because Werner von Braun, I think knew something was up, he knew something was up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that some people have these ideas, or some people believe that NASA was really a front for something that was much more occult rather than actually about going to space.
Yeah, so
because NASA was formed during Operation Paperclip.
Okay, I can't speak to that at the moment. I've just gotten up to get my Bible. Not my Bible, actually, my Book of Common Prayer, because the Book of Common Prayer has the best translation of the Psalms in it. It's called the Coverdale translation. And on Werner von Braun's grave it doesn't have the passage written out. It just has Psalm 19:1. And Psalm 19:1 reads from my Coverdale Bible, my Coverdale Psalter, which is superior. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Now, the firmament is that, like, bubble of water being held back. And a lot of people are like, wait a minute, what? Why does Werner von Braun have something about the firmament on his grave? Anyway, I digress. That's something for another time. These guys are, the point is they're all using like this German technology. Now, there's a very weird thing that comes up out of this this posturing and this conflict, and it is this. And I there's a lot in here where I think the best thing is just to read for this chapter, read bits of quickly. So here's the first thing. One significant consequence of this situation, the Cold War going on, was the almost total collapse of the system of international law that had been formulated in the 17th century by the work of writers like Grotius. The system of international law had regarded the state as the embodiment of sovereignty, an organization of political power on a territorial basis. The criteria for the existence of such a sovereign state have been its ability to defend its boundaries against external aggression and to maintain law and public order among its inhabitants inside those boundaries. By 1964, as a consequence of the power stalemate of the Cold War, dozens of, quote, states, brackets such as the Congo, brackets, which could perform neither of these actions were recognized as states by the superpowers and their allies, and achieved this recognition in international law by being admitted to the United Nations. This development culminated over 50 years of destruction of the old established distinctions of international law, such as the distinctions between war and peace, destroyed by the Cold War, which was neither, between belligerents and neutrals, destroyed by British economic warfare in World War I, or between civilians and combatants, destroyed by submarine warfare and city bombing. Nuclear stalemate in the Cold War context made it possible for political organizations with almost none of the traditional characteristics of a state not only to be recognized as states, but to act in irresponsible ways and to survive on economic subsidies won from one bloc by threatening to join or merely to accept subsidies from the other bloc. As a consequence of this situation, all the realities of international affairs by 1964 have become covered with thick layers of laws, theories, practices, and agreements that had no relationship to reality at all. Today, the pressure of the realities beneath that layer to break through it and emerge into the daylight where they can be generally recognized has reached a critical point. As part of that process of increasing sanity, which the recognition of reality always is, the future of disarmament became more hopeful than it had been in decades, although the chances of reaching any substantial disarmament agreements remain slight. This means that disarmament is more likely to appear in the form of nuclear disengagement and tacit adoption of parallel actions than in the form of explicit agreements or signed documents. The amount of myth and false theories that must be pushed aside to permit even the highest peaks of reality to emerge is very large. In the United Nations alone, it involves such points as the recognition of the Congo as a state, the belief that Taiwan is a great power, worthy of one of the 4 permanent veto-wielding seats on the Security Council, or the pretense that Red China, in spite of its possession of all the traditional attributes of statehood, does not exist. Right at this time, like, they're saying Taiwan should be on the Security Council and China doesn't exist because, enough conservative powers are backing Taiwan still. Part of this return to reality is embodied in the growing recognition that there are more situations in which the United States and the Soviet Union have parallel interests than there are which their interests are antithetical. Certainly, they have a common interest in avoiding nuclear war and preventing the spread of nuclear weapons to additional states, in not poisoning the atmosphere with radioactive fallout from nuclear testing, in slowing up weapons development, technological rivalry, and the space race in order to direct more resources to domestic problems of poverty, social disorganization, and education, or in refraining from outbidding each other in grants of arms and aid to unreliable, ungrateful, unstable, and inefficient neutralist regimes. If that all sounds familiar, don't complain to me. And I think one of the interesting things there is this, the accrual of international law that doesn't mean anything. Well, and then we get this situation whereby the Cold War ends in 1992, But the international law doesn't go away. And so we've accumulated this whole pile of bullshit that all of a sudden we start paying attention to, which is really damaging and distracting to us. Triangle C. When Napoleon called the Brits a nation of shopkeepers, he wasn't just pulling random insults out of his ass. He knew what he was talking about. They thought that makes them morally superior and more civilized than others. Triangle C. The English at least, are the most civilized people on Earth, and I'm sorry that you seem to have trouble with that. By calling Britain or England a nation of shopkeepers, he was observing that the way that can be translated is the nation of yeomen, in which each individual has sort of control and autonomy over their own lives, and that they are. It's long been recognized by the English that it's better to be free and an Englishman than it would be to be a French noble. So we don't need grand titles or anything like that. Being English is a high enough honor. No, Dark of the Dark. I haven't done that. That's not this episode. Atlantis is another episode. So one of the things that one of the things that comes about at this period with all this stuff going on is the Russians make some big leaps in space race. Now, I'm sure you know that that is Sputnik, which Sputnik goes up, and it really shocks America. They go, "Oh my God, what?" And then that's Gagarin up in the corner, and I bet you don't know who that is. The other guy.
Nope.
That is a guy named Alexei Komarov. And Alexei Komarov I have in there because particularly dark story. You may have heard of the Lost Cosmonauts, which are a theory that the Russians lost a lot of guys, a lot of cosmonauts, and we only really learned about their successes. I'll play a little thing here. So this is that guy is. This is ground control, and then in a minute you'll hear Komarov. That's Komarov.
I don't hear anything.
Oh, do you not?
Yeah.
Oh, you wouldn't because you're not streaming.
That's right.
So it's just some guys talking in Russian anyway, but one of them is sort of a bit fainter than the other, and that is Komarov, who is hurtling towards his death, and he knows it. And he is saying, he sort of says, like, "You fucking bastards." I believe he sort of criticizes the USSR as a system. He's like, "You've killed me. You assholes have killed me." Because the Soviets in the rush get Komarov up there very quickly. And before Komarov goes up there, he dies in 1967. He goes up there in 1967, and the backup pilot was going to be Yuri Gagarin. Now, Yuri Gagarin had gone up there in 1961. He'd already been the first man on Earth. Yuri Gagarin, incidentally, dies in 1968. He dies in kind of a similar circumstances. Crash of a fighter jet that he's fine. The Russians did not make very good things. They just sort of like were bloody minded about it. So Komarov goes up there and he writes this letter, and his best friend is in the KGB, and he gives this letter to his friend in the KGB, and he says, "Give this to Brezhnev," and his friend's like, "You can't get anyone to take it to Brezhnev. Nobody wants to know about it." But what the letter says is, this is a death trap. Everybody has rushed this through. There's a lot of errors. Apparently, Gagarin walked around looking at this spacecraft, and like they identified like 200 plus things that were wrong, and eventually someone goes to Komarov, you don't need to go up, just don't go up. And Komarov goes, yeah, if I don't go up, Gagarin's gonna go up. So I have to do it. I can't let my friend die, because they're really good friends. So that it's a particularly like haunting moment of this guy coming face to face with the insanity that was the Soviet Union and predicting his own death, and then in the last moments of his life reaching out and confirming and transmitting this sort of ghostly damnation of all those people that have been involved in it. Anyway, the Soviets, what they do, the advantage that they give themselves is they hyper focus on certain things. And so what that means is they get a head start in the space race over the Americans. What the Soviets failed to do, though, is move, do a broad spectrum technological development. So yeah, while the Americans are behind in space propulsion, they're ahead pretty much everywhere else, and eventually they catch up in space propulsion. And the Soviets get overtaken. And it's largely the Americans get some focus from this loss of the space race. Cooley says they get impacted three ways: psychologically, educationally, and economically. And it shakes them up in all three areas. It really like motivates them and kicks them up the butt. This is a little bit. I'm going to come back to that. Quigley has not written this chapter in a well structured way, so I'm on the fly chopping and changing some things, the order that I'm going to talk about them. Khrushchev wakes up to the potential of America, though, in the sort of conversation of like technology, when he comes over to the U.S. and visits, and he goes to Iowa farms, and he sees the scale on which Americans are doing things with machinery, and I think this is when he realizes, like, oh, we got a problem. The Americans are going to outcompete us. And he would even, like, brag to people about American farming techniques. He goes, you want to know what to do? Go look at what the Americans are doing. He says this to the Hungarians. And he starts to liberalize the Russian sort of system and markets, all the while dealing with Mao as a bit of a thorn in his side. Now, we're going to pivot now to Latin America. Now, if you look at these two maps, you can see that practically every Latin American country has been interfered with by America. Now, on that one on the right, it says U.S.-backed right-wing military coups in Latin America, and the immediate impulse is to go based, but no, these coups and interventions on the part of America represent 50 to 100 years of failed American policy. And what you should take from these maps is that the Americans suck at empire. You don't need, a good empire does not need to militarily intervene via coups in a hemisphere that it has all to itself. That's not what a good empire needs to do. A good empire sometimes will do that, but America just sucks because every one of these interventions represents a long buildup in which America mismanages Latin America. And all of these, I'm quite certain, could have been avoided, but no, America is just retarded. The thing to look at here is Guatemala in 1954. Why Guatemala in 54? Well, in 1961, prior to that, there's a successful coup in Guatemala in which the Americans install a friendly government. And they start looking around, and Cuba goes through its coup, goes through its revolution. And the Americans go, well, Guatemala's pretty close to Cuba. It's got our guy there. And we're going to use Guatemala as a way of kicking off things. So they go through the Bay of Pigs, which is a disaster. And the U.S. military gets embarrassed. Things then start to escalate. Now, on this picture, that's a bunch of bananas. What the hell did bananas have to do with anything? Well, quite a lot. There's a lot of money in bananas, and there certainly were back in the early and mid 20th century. My mom and dad did not see bananas really for the first 10, 15 years of their lives in England. Bananas were treats. Quite rare. America had a lot of bananas because it had controlled Central America. Banana Republic refers to the United Fruit Company going in and basically taking over control of Central American countries because they could grow bananas for America. That's what it has to do with bananas. It's just bananas. There's coffee. Coffee's involved as well. But bananas, there's a reason it's Banana Republic. And on the right there, you see the emblem, sigil, whatever you want to call it, for the School of the Americas, which has been, they've changed their name now, but it's an institution that's been running since at least the 40s. And they specialize in taking right-wing groups and teaching them how to terrorize and dominate their own countries. Now, I am conservative, but I am not the type of conservative that likes the School of the Americas, because as I pointed out in the previous slide, what the School of the Americas represents is an American inability to manage its hemisphere. They only know how to do it one way, which is bloody coups or economic coercion. There's no subtlety to the Americans. They've no understanding of diplomacy. They no understanding of quid pro quo. And a lot of people have died south of the Rio Grande because Americans are morons when it comes to foreign policy. And that is captured by the School of the Americas. So, America has done all this. It's alienated, centrists. It's sort of cut the legs out from the centrists. The center ground gets abandoned, and people become either very conservative or very left-wing. This map shows the way in which the Soviets were trying to get IRBMs into Cuba. You remember, if we go back, America had done this to them, and now the Americans had misplayed their hand in Cuba, and the Soviets were going to take advantage. Because if they had to live with IRBMs on their border, if Americans could lob IRBMs from Turkey, then it made sense, and it was quite rational for the Soviets to try to seek reestablishing a status quo by being able to lob missiles at Washington. And that's what this map is. And you see there the routes in which the Soviet ships were going to Cuba, and the range in which the various missiles could reach. There's MRBMs there, medium-range ballistic missiles. There's a whole taxonomy of ballistic missiles and how far they can reach. Really, IRBMs, MRBMs, it's the same thing for our purposes. Here you can see a little bit better the range of the missiles. Now, the Americans see this. They realize they have missiles planted on their doorstep, and they let it be known that this cannot continue. So I want to read from Quigley again. The week of October 14 to the 21st was one of steadily increasing crisis within the United States government, although no public announcement was made before the President's speech of Monday, October 22nd, 1962. This speech established a quarantine on all offensive equipment under shipment to Cuba, demanded dismantling of the missile sites, and withdrawal of Soviet forces under threat of stronger action by the United States, and announced that any missile launched from Cuba against any nation shall be regarded as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring full retaliation. The effects of this speech were explosive. To the world, it began 6 days of crisis in which the two superpowers hung on the brink of nuclear war. In reality, the situation was quite different. The crisis, in fact, was an almost perfect example of a diplomatic crisis and of how such a crisis should be handled. The pattern for classic diplomatic crisis is 3 stages. 1, confrontation, 2, recognition, and 3, settlement. The confrontation consists of a dispute, that is, a power challenge in some area of conflict. Stage 2 is recognition by both sides of the realities of the power relationship between them, always much easier when only 2 states are involved. And stage 3 is a yielding by the weaker of the two, accompanied by an effort of the stronger to cover that retreat by refusing to inflict a humiliation or obvious triumph over the weaker. As Metternich said, who was the great Austrian diplomat of the Congress of Vienna, a diplomat is a man who never allows himself the pleasure of a triumph, and does so simply because it is the interest of the stronger that an opponent who recognizes the victor's strength and is reasonable in yielding to it not be overthrown or replaced by another ruler who is too ignorant or too unreasonable to do so. The crisis of October 1962 was conducted along these lines in a masterly fashion by President Kennedy, except for a few minor blemishes caused by some of his subordinates. Now, I want you to think about that, and I want you to think where we are now, because I think our diplomats are retards. And I'll tell you, the way to put it is this. I don't think globo homo girl boss diplomacy would not inflict a humiliating triumph over Putin or Xi Jinping or anyone they don't like to prove some sort of yay girl boss point. They would have us go. They would have us risk nuclear war for gays and women, and that's what drives me crazy about this situation. Kennedy knew not to push his advantage with Khrushchev. He could have destroyed Khrushchev. Khrushchev could have been done after the Cuban Missile Crisis, but Kennedy let Khrushchev have the appearance of power. it's obvious to everybody that America won the Cuban Missile Crisis in terms of a showdown because the Soviets withdrew. But and I mentioned that letter. Kennedy does not press the advantage that he has over this letter. I'm just having a drink. Sorry. So, yeah. Once again, the world has gotten worse. And it's gotten worse because, as stupid as American diplomats were in 1962, they're a lot worse now. I don't have it in my notes. I'll just talk a little bit briefly about Latin America. Quigley says Latin America, he spends a lot of this chapter talking about it. What he says is Latin America inherits too much of, via the Spanish, too much of what he calls Asian despotism. And he says the Spanish have Asian despotism because of the Arab influence. And Asian despotism is the creation of a two-class society, which is a small elite warrior caste ruling over a peasantry caste. It's very preferential to men, and women virtually have no rights, and it's very cousin-oriented. And he says all of this gets brought over to Latin America, and to its detriment. Cousin-oriented, I mean marrying their cousins. And he says you can see a set of behaviors more or less grouped around a core that runs from Pakistan to Peru. The West does not have this. The West has exogamous marriage rather than endogamous. It has a pluralistic set of traditions that are not oriented around a military caste, and it has the ability to build a surplus and then use that surplus for productive purposes. He says Latin America doesn't have any of those things, and that if Latin America wants to move forward, it can, but it has to adopt these sets of behaviors. And he talks about like patterns and structures, and really, basically, he says the problem with Latin America is culture, and if Latin America just changes its culture, it can have everything the West has, and America spends a lot of time trying to help Latin America, but helping it badly. There's a lot in there, but it's not worth going into. So yeah, that's what to say. And the reason this is outside of the next bit is this isn't an empire proper, right? This is like sphere of influence. But now I want to talk about the empires. Because while all this is happening, 57 to 63, the empires are falling. Anyone want to take a guess as to where this is? I don't know which city this is, but I can tell you what empire it is. Any guesses? Jeff, you want to take a guess?
Oh, based on your kind of tone of voice, it's got to be something surprising, right? It's somewhere, I'm guessing, it's like Iran or something, right?
No.
Or is it somewhere in Africa?
Yeah. It's not Cuba, Dark of the Dark. Not Jamaica. This is the Congo. This is what the Congo looked like in the 50s. I bet you it doesn't look like that today. Now, one of the really interesting thing Quigley says is I got some Congo slides here because they are, in the words of a good friend of mine, Kino. This is a picture from the Congo crisis. These are some mercenaries. The Congo in 1960 is actually a great place. it works. They get independence in 1960. But what clearly says that they do is they actually teach the Africans how to do stuff. They give them skills. They don't wring their hands about, oh, these poor Africans, they really must, get some literature from Oxford. We must send them to Oxford or the Sorbonne. They don't do that. The Belgians are like, you don't need a fucking degree. All you need is to learn how to do something. And there's a pretty decent African middle class in the Congo. And the other thing the Belgians do is they say, you don't need to know what's going on in Europe. You don't need to know. It doesn't matter to you. It's irrelevant to your life. Don't worry about it. Just live. And the KGB and the CIA see this and they go, oh, we can't have that. Now, one of the projects that has been on my to-do list for a while is tracing the moments when the KGB and the CIA make common cause. And I'm quite sure that with the Congo, as with Rhodesia, I know this for a fact with Rhodesia, the KGB and the CIA make common cause. They don't agree about who to put in after they tear down the empire, the imperial presence, but they can agree we want to get rid of these imperial people. Once again, the Americans are retarded. We're going to get to that though in a second. So the problem that the British and the French have is they take their they get their lovely notion of uplifting these people, and they get the best Nigerians and Vietnamese and whatevers, and they send them to the imperial capitals. They send them to the Sorbonne, they send them to Oxford and Cambridge, and they're like, we're going to teach you, and you're going to be these great people that lead your countries. It's going to be great. It's going to be great, guys. And while they're at Oxford and Cambridge and the Sorbonne, these imperial, guys, these conquered peoples encounter Marxists who go, you can destroy these empires if you go back and do what we tell you. Just agitate. And they go, oh, great idea. And they go back and they agitate. So the British and the French are retarded because they teach these people how to do it themselves. The British and French are it's crazy. It is crazy when you think about how the West has tolerated Marxism in its in its civilization for as long as it has. It has been a poison. It has been a cancer eating away at the heart and soul of our civilization. And when someone like McCarthy tries to do anything about it, he gets demonized. Of course you don't want communists in the State Department. Of course you don't want communists in the military when you're fighting a Cold War against communists. Is this what I don't know how to communicate to people that are like, yeah, that's fine. Well, and we still have this problem today, and I'll say this: the infiltration of communists into the system did not begin in 1968. It's been going on a lot older than that. In my civilizational readings, I'm looking at a guy named V. Gordon Childe, who's very influential in archaeology and anthropology and early, ancient history. And he's writing from, 1915 onwards. He's at Oxford during the First World War. He's an Australian who finds himself at Oxford, and he goes, I'm not going to fight in your war. Fair enough. I don't have a problem with that. But, he's a Marxist, and he's there, and he's openly a Marxist from 1915, 1916 onwards. These people have been in our system since the First World War. So that's another reason why you can sort of say the world went downhill from 1914 onwards. What's interesting though is in many of these colonies, the very few of them actually have to fight for their very few of them have to fight for their independence. They're granted independence. There's agitation, there are, terrorist campaigns, but there isn't actually like many wars of independence that happen during this time. I'll just read this out. In spite of the pressure and even the power of these changes in the colonial situation on the side of the subject peoples, there were at least equally significant and largely unrecognized changes on the side of their imperial rulers. For it must be recognized that in very few cases did native peoples achieve independence as a consequence of a successful revolt by force. On the contrary, in case after case, independence was granted after a relatively moderate agitation by a former ruling power, which showed a certain relief to be rid of its colonial burden. This indicates a profound change in attitude toward colonies within the imperialist countries. The significance of this change can hardly be denied. The real question is concerned with its causes. Before 1914, the possession of colonial territories was of little direct concern to most peoples in the imperial homeland. They knew that their country had colonies and ruled over peoples quite different from themselves, and this was regarded rather generally as probably a good thing, a source of pride to most citizens, and probably of some material advantage to the country as a whole. The costs on holding colonial areas was not generally recognized and were usually felt to be minor and incidental. But in the post-war period, these costs very rapidly became major and direct charges, quite unacceptable to the ordinary citizen. When the post-war period and increasing anti-colonial agitations required heavy taxation, compulsory military service to regain or to retain such colonial areas. Once this was recognized, the former rather vague satisfaction with colonial possessions soon disappeared, and there was a rapidly spreading conviction that colonies were not worth it. The spread of the burden of taxes and military services in remote areas was regarded as part of the war, to be ended as completely as possible, with the war itself not to be continued indefinitely into the post-war period. Another closely related change occurred in economic aspirations. The citizens of the European colonial powers had survived 6 years of hardships in the war itself, and in most cases a decade or more of economic hardships in the pre-war depression. And not just that, after the war. My parents were quite old when they had me. My parents both remembered sugar rationing. They didn't have sugar openly until like the late 50s. My dad had a ration book so that he could get sweets at the local shop. And people don't remember this. The war demonstrated that such economic hardships had been needless, that the massive economic mobilization for the war showed clearly that there could be an equally massive post-war mobilization of resources for prosperity. The ordinary European was determined to obtain the rising standards of living and welfare security that he had been denied in depression and war, and he had no stomach to be denied these any longer in order to hold in subjection native peoples who wanted independence. Thus, the former beneficiaries and upholders of empire, usually restricted to an upper-class minority or specialized interest group, found that these interests no longer would be supported by the majority of their own citizens. In some cases, independence was achieved after a period of violence, rioting, and guerrilla warfare, although in no cases did these actions, however extensive, become a matching of force between the colonial area and the imperial power. In no case could these powers be matched, since the latter was overwhelmingly larger. In most cases, a more or less token display of force by the colonial peoples showed that they could be subdued only by an expenditure of resources and inconveniences which the ruling power decided it did not care to make. The existence of the Soviet bloc and the appearance of the Cold War, with its almost irresistible demands for expenditure of resources, helped to tip the decision toward independence. Moreover, and once again, here it is, right in the gut. Moreover, the opinion of the United States was favorable to independence for subject peoples in a rather doctrinaire and naive anti-colonialism rooted in the American revolutionary tradition, without regard for the very great benefits the native peoples had obtained from their European rulers. You want to watch something that will make you the most imperialist you will ever be. You will be easily to be the most imperial person in the room. Go watch Audio Africa. It's an Italian movie where these guys, these like couple of film crews are in Africa for like 4 or 5 years, and it's like and from like the early 60s, right? And the shit that they film in the Congo is so crazy. It makes it's a different fucking planet. I don't know what to tell you. It's so insane what happens in the Congo. The Congo goes from this rather nice, on its way upwards, middle class Africans to Mad Max, and they just start killing whites, as any whites they can get their hands on. They're killing nunneries, and these guys show up, and they're like, you hear about what the whites do in Congo when they show up. Yeah, it's because there's a bunch of these clips go around on 4chan all the time. You might recognize them, and there's just one of this like European mercenary executing a black guy, because and when you watch the movie, you hear what the story is for this execution. It's because he like rapes a girl and kills her, and he's like, okay, and you know what? The trial lasts about a minute, and the execution is swift, and it's some rough frontier justice. But when you know the story, when you start to find out what prompts these guys, these European mercenaries, to do what they do, it makes a lot of sense, because they'll roll into villages and find skulls rotting on top of sticks, and the nuns that were supposed to be there, nobody knows where they are. Oh, they're all gone. And then they find like a mass grave, and they're like, you know what, we can be savage too. So it's brutal out there. But interestingly, a lot of these guys are German. A lot of these guys are Germans who get disbanded and have to like get out of Germany for various reasons, and they end up in the French Foreign Legion and in these like African mercenary bands. So generally, I mean, the decolonization process happens all over the place. Empires are crumbling. This is Algeria. Algeria has a very long thing, and I'm gonna that bit I said I'm gonna hold off on that. I'm gonna hop back now because we're on Algeria, and I think it's worth talking about de Gaulle. De Gaulle is this thorn in the side for the Americans. In September 1958, de Gaulle asked that a tripartite directorate be established of the United States, Britain, and France to provide consultation on a global basis wider than the European limited control exercised through NATO. This demand was very well founded, since America's actions in Quemoy, or in the, I don't know where Quemoy is, I can't remember, or in the landing of American Marines in Lebanon in July 1958, might have led to war with the Soviet Union and a Soviet attack on Western Europe, over an area and issue in which France had not been involved or consulted. De Gaulle's request was rejected. As soon as the imperious general had been inaugurated as the first president of the Fifth Republic, January 1959, he took steps to extricate France from some of the French commitments to NATO. The French Mediterranean fleet was removed from NATO control. The use of France as a base for nuclear weapons, either from planes or missiles, was refused, and French participation in a unified European air defense system was denied. In two-day talks in Paris, December 19th and 20th, 1959, the two presidents, Eisenhower and de Gaulle, went over the ground again and reached a stalemate. Eisenhower rejected de Gaulle's suggestion for a three-power global policy directorate, and de Gaulle rejected Eisenhower's desire for an integrated air and naval defense system for Europe. And de Gaulle eventually withdraws from NATO. And now we get to Algeria. Algeria has a large French population, the Pied Noir. and these guys do not want to leave France. Algeria is considered France. Algeria is considered not a French possession. It is considered to be France, the France on the other side of the Mediterranean, and they do not want to go. And a group forms, the OAS, the Organisation Algeria Secret, something like that, society. I can't remember. And they are committed to holding Algeria. De Gaulle sees the writing on the wall and starts to, although he runs on the platform of Algeria is totally ours, we're not going to give it up, he then sort of starts to see that, like, there's not much that can be done. I'm going to have to cut my losses and get out. And the OAS really, really doesn't like this. And the OAS is heavily involved. The French Foreign Legion is on their side as well. And there's an assassination attempt on de Gaulle by the OAS. Now, who is behind that assassination attempt? Who helps the OAS? Well, it's the CIA. And de Gaulle figures this out. He figures out that the Americans supported... I'm not saying, like, JFK. I'm saying the CIA acting as a... acting in the way the CIA acts independently. Here's another image I thought was quite cinematic. The OAS tries to kill him, and de Gaulle's like, well, okay. So de Gaulle then, a few years later, I think he goes, okay, Anglos, okay, I see how it's going to be. And again, this is one of my little theories. De Gaulle then goes over to Quebec, and he gives the Quebec speech that basically launches Quebecois efforts for independence. Just getting my notes here. But what comes out of this, though, is the French decolonize. This is important. The French they formally decolonize, but they maintain some very formal links with their former colonies. And if you've heard about how the French take African gold, and how there's the African franc that West and Central former French African colonies use, that is because of this, like, survival of these. The French maintain some very direct links with these countries. The British don't do this. The British are very different. This is the Mau Mau rebellion. These are Mau Maus, and oh, look at these terrible Englishmen. What are they doing? What are they doing? They are trying to prevent the Mau Mau from going onto farms and brutally killing white farmers any way they can. Yes, they make what you can call concentration camps. They're not death camps. Don't listen to left-wing women who write books about the Mau Mau rebellion, write a whole bunch of horseshit about the Mau Mau rebellion, confuse you. There's a difference between a concentration camp and a death camp. It is true that the British invented the concept of a concentration camp to deal with the Boers, because the Boers were fighting a guerrilla war, and the British went, well, we're going to put your women and children into a camp. And the Boers didn't like that, and the British said, well, too bad, we're fighting a war against you. And the Boers started blowing up the caravans that were meant for their women and to feed their women and children. And so their women and children starved, and because of their own fault, because they fought the British, which the British were there because the Boers were not playing fairly with English settlers. And so the English said, well, we're going to protect our people. And similarly with the Mau Mau, they went in, and Kenya, the Mau Mau were going on, and, basically what the South Africans are living with now times a couple of magnitude. The Mau Mau were doing that to farmers in Kenya. Brutal killings. And the British said, well, we're not going to put up with this. Enough's enough. And they started to round up Mau Mau and put them into camps so that they couldn't go around killing people. And yes, they would execute the guys who were guilty of that. And that's that's the extent of evil British activity was. The British are evil because they didn't want to let Mau Maus kill white people. This is another one of those. You want to guess where this is? Oh, you can see it up there. There's a watermark on there. No, there's 2 watermarks on there. This is Salisbury in Rhodesia, as was Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. The most prosperous African country there was up until 1980. And it's a long story. It's a long, sad story. But the Americans and the KGB and the British elite colluded, and the Rhodesians saw the way the world was going, and they said, you know what, before you can ruin our country by giving it over to people who are not able to govern it, we're going to take it. And we're not going to let you. We're not going to let you throw away what we've built here. And so they had UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence. Ian Smith was there. I don't know if Ian Smith was a signatory or if he became president later. But if you've heard of Ian Smith, this is where he comes in. A hero of the Second World War. And they maintain independence for 20 years. And one of the ways they maintain independence for 20 years is they have South Africa to the south, and they have Mozambique to the... Malawi to the east. Or Mozambique. Let's have a look here. And the point is that... at the time... the Portuguese had this East African. Let's see, what do they have? Yeah, they have Mozambique, and so Zimbabwe can go south through South Africa and east through Mozambique. And what happens is the Portuguese hold on to their empire until the 70s. I believe it's 76. And something called the Carnation Revolution happens, whereby, so if someone's stupid or ignorant of history, if they call the Portuguese fascists, they were just really conservative, Catholic. What's the phrase? Integralists. They were. Salazar was not a fascist. Don't believe anybody that tells you Salazar was a fascist. And they hold on to their territory till the 70s, after Quigley is done writing this book. And they have Mozambique, and in 76 they go through the Carnation Revolution, which is, there's a song that they perform for Eurovision, and it's like everybody votes for this song. It's about like carnations, and the Portuguese contingent performs this song. It's like this anti-regime song. And Eurovision prompts the fall of the Portuguese government. Can you believe it? They incidentally, the Portuguese have the last bit of India. It's Goa on the west coast. And in like 72 or 70, the Indians go, we want Goa. And the Portuguese go, you can't have it. It's ours. And the Indians go, I mean, this is great Indian logic, right? The Indians go, but the British gave us back India. And the Portuguese go, "We were here before the British, and the British can't give away our territory. So good luck." And then in a very quick war, India and Portugal have this like 3-day war where the Indians take Goa. Another place actually quite significant in the last couple of years. The Portuguese have East Timor. Now, most of Indonesia is Dutch, but there's this little half of the island of Timor, which is Portuguese, and the Portuguese leave, and the Indonesians take it and kill a lot of people. Again, wow, these Muslim Indonesians come in and they kill a lot of Timorese Catholics, and eventually the Australians go, "Right, that's enough, mate," and they go in and put an end to it, and East Timor becomes independent. And a fun little fact: the main resistance group is like formed around biker gangs, and so these like Catholic Timorese biker gangs waging this insurgency against Indonesian Muslims is pretty metal. I like it. And so anyway, so Mozambique falls, and Rhodesia doesn't have an eastwards way out. They're landlocked, right? And the U.S. and the West start to pile pressure on South Africa because Rhodesia is an embarrassment to the West. It's a country they couldn't ruin. So they really want to get... They don't even care about South Africa. And it's predictable. It's predictable because you could have said, it was nobody saying to the South Africans, if you do this, you're next. Come on. I can't believe nobody said that to the South Africans. If you let them mess with Rhodesia, you're going to be next. Anyway, well, that's what happens in 1980. The Rhodesians have no more road to run on because the South Africans have cut them off. And some of the most, I would bet that the Rhodesians waged the greatest victories in history. Forget Alexander the Great. Forget, Rommel. Forget Napoleon. The greatest victory, I don't know what it is. I can't tell you which one it is, because there's a few that are contenders. But the greatest victory in history was won by Rhodesians. There are guys who were like, I read this excerpt from somebody's memoirs, and he was like, I must have killed, it was like, there would be 4-man patrols that would go out, and these are like reservists. They would go out and they would just kill hundreds of guerrillas, and they would come back, and this guy was like, I was so sick of killing people. And I remember walking through the grass, and I looked down, and there was a gorilla lying there, and he was frozen. He was terrified. And I looked at him, and I'd killed so many people, and I'd fought so many of these guys, and I looked at him, and I went, this guy can't kill anybody. I can see it in his eyes. I can see he can't kill anyone. So I just left him, and I kept walking. And I know he never killed anyone. I know he wasn't a threat. The victory that comes to mind, though, is this raid into Mozambique after the Portuguese have left, and it's like these 3 or 4 trucks of Rhodesians. They go in blackface, and also they have black soldiers. More black soldiers fought for Rhodesia than white soldiers. More black soldiers fought for Rhodesia than fought for the guerrillas. The blacks, a lot of the blacks, the majority of the blacks, knew what side their bread was buttered on. They knew that Rhodesia worked, and they knew that Zimbabwe was not going to work. And they go into Mozambique. Let's see what is this? The name of this raid. Anyway, they go into this. They go into Mozambique, and all the white soldiers are in blackface, and the black soldiers are there to help anyway. And it's like 16 or 20 guys, and they go into this communist camp, and everybody's there on morning parade, and these trucks, these Rhodesian trucks, pull up, and everybody thinks that they're friendlies. It's Nyanzonya raid, Operation Eland. The Selu Scouts led it, and the Selu Scouts are just about one of the most celebrated units in history. They had 4 armored cars, and they pull into this camp, and there's 5,000 guerrillas in the camp, and they're all there. The Rhodesians are like, you know what? Let's just shoot, and they just start shooting, and nobody dies. They don't lose any guys. The Rhodesians don't lose any guys, and it's like so many guerrillas die that it's very, nobody knows. More than 1,000 guys died without a single casualty. So it's a hell of a thing that the Rhodesians are able to accomplish. They hold together this country for 20 years. They become incredibly innovative in military tactics. And this is not a professional force. Yes, there's a professional corps. But there are guys who they go off for 2 weeks every 6 months. And they fight. These are reservists. And their families are getting killed. They're building... And they built this country. They built this country. And they get stabbed in the back by the Americans and the KGB, and they throw the country away. And Rhodesia goes from being the biggest grain exporter in Africa to now Zimbabwe is the biggest grain importer in Africa. They've destroyed everything. And actually, this is poetic. I didn't plan this, but it's fitting that on the last moment of the actual history of Quigley that we talk about Rhodesia, because if you think back to the episode we did on the Anglo-American establishment, what starts this whole process, this era of war, what Tragedy and Hope is the third age of conflict that the Western civilization has gone through. And what we're going to look at next time is Quigley's thoughts on it and how it can hopefully short-circuit the sort of course of civilizations and go back into an age of expansion. Quigley says the West is the only civilization that's able to escape this pattern and can go back to the age of expansion if it somehow. And Quigley will talk about that next time. But the age of conflict really kicks off in many ways in Africa with the Boer War and the Germans supporting the Boers and the Boers going against the course of history with the English coming in, and then the fighting against the settling of Rhodesia, and Rhodesia. Nobody lives in Rhodesia before the Rhodesians show up. The whites show up, Rhodes, led by Cecil Rhodes. They settle the interior of the continent, and it's like a couple of years later in South Africa, in the Zulu territory that's like conceded to the Zulus, like in the way that there's Lesotho and Swaziland, which are kind of like Native American reservations for these two groups. I think Lesotho is supposed to be for the Xhosa, and Swaziland is supposed to be for the Zulu. And something called the Mafeking happens. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. The Mafeking happens and destabilizes the Zulu nation, and they just move into Rhodesia. And they go, oh, there's a bunch of white people here building things. We'd like to be near that. And then 60, 80 years later, oh no, this is our country. What do you mean? We've always been here. You white people didn't do anything. You white people built it off of our backs. It's just not how things happened. But so yeah, that's Rhodesia. That is, I'll probably at some point do a deep dive on Rhodesia. I'll do an episode on Rhodesia. But that's it. That's where we are. That's the end of tragedy. That's the end of the history for Tragedy and Hope. We have one more chapter. And as I said, it's Quigley's sort of forward-looking chapter. What he thinks we can do going forward. But that's the history over. It only took us 16 weeks. 16 episodes. It took us more than that because we regularly miss weeks. But that is that, guys. And if there are any questions, I assume Jeff has been quiet because he's lying down.
Next time we'll post a picture of my new computer setup. I have a desk that goes down to about 30 centimeters off the ground, and I can lie on the ground and use my computer.
Nice.
Yeah, it's good timing. It just arrived 2 weeks ago.
What the? Renegade, what do you mean the little postscript? What? Oh, the
It means that it's a
the
big
chapter
postscript.
20. Yeah, chapter
30 centimeters, that is. They're not 37 meters.
The postscript is instead of it being 120 pages, the postscript is only 110 pages. So, but I will. I'm going to do a lot of synthesizing there. I'm not going to be because there's less historical events to describe, and I can more concisely summarize Quigley's stuff. Ugh.
I kind of want to go back to Latin America for a moment. You said that the U.S. didn't need to do all of these coups. But obviously they were worried about communism taking over.
But that comes after. That what I mean is that these things are not done in response to communist coups. They're done in response to communist coups, which are done in response to American exploitation and bungling in Latin America. For most countries in the world, communism is actually a very bad implementation of communism, and not in the way that like people mean when they say that. But what I mean is usually these revolutions are incredibly nationalist, which is not good communism. They're like Cuban communism is very, very Cuban. It is they talk about like revolution of the global masses, the proletariat. They say that, but it's still very much about Cuba, and that's true of all these Latin American countries. They're really nationalistic movements that are using communism. A good example of this is like the Kurds. The Kurds get no love from the West during the Cold War because Turkey's in NATO, and Turkey's a very valuable asset to NATO in the Cold War. And the Turks are brutal to the Kurds. And so where do the Kurds find support? They find support from the Russians. And so the Kurds go, I guess we're communists now. Now you go to Turkey, you go to the Kurdistan. They're not communist, guys, but they call themselves very left wing. Right, the PKK has like transitioned from being communist formally to just being like socialist. But they're not socialists. They're not doing like redistributive anything. It's just nationalism. And so the Americans, so like what happens very quickly is there are these revolutionary movements that are motivated by seeing what Napoleon does, Simon Bolivar, and they separate away from Spain. Also because Spain is weakened by the Napoleonic Wars. They leave Spain. And then America finishes Spain off in 1901, whatever it is, the Spanish-American War, which is the biggest joke of a war ever in terms of like justification for it. Like some American, there's an explosion on, is it the Maine, the USS Maine, which is like done through American incompetence, and they go, oh, the Spanish did it, and they declare war on Spain. And then they get the rest. They get Puerto Rico. Cuba basically becomes an imperial possession for 40 or 50 years. First formally and then informally. That's how the Americans get Guantanamo Bay. And so off the back of the Bolivaran Revolution and off the back of the Spanish-American War, they're now the only players in the hemisphere. The British are very happy the British and American have this sort of informal agreement where it's like the Americans are happy for the British to protect trade outside of the Western Hemisphere, and the British are just glad they don't have to deploy the Royal Navy to protect Canada and the Caribbean. And the Americans developed the Monroe Doctrine, which says the Western Hemisphere is ours. And they then, with all the subtlety of a baby elephant, just start crashing about the place. They do not know how to interact with other peoples, and they alienate huge portions of just about every Latin American country. And they do it, the American, what's remarkable, what is really, really incredibly remarkable about America is how they squander the goodwill of the globe, the whole world. In 1945, practically every country on the planet loves America, including the Russians. The Russians are really pro-American, despite Stalin's efforts. And, in the course of 20 years, they throw it all away with the most inept bungling. People are going to talk about people are going to study the fall of the American Empire of the post-war period as one in which, despite its economic and military strengths, America was too retarded. I cannot think of another empire that has ever, through such ineptitude, done what America's done to itself. And I can tell you the reason why it's done it. Quigley says that in the beginning of this process, the beginning of Tragedy and Hope, what we have is empires, a system of empires that are predicated upon realist conflict. They're Mearsheimer empires, right? And at the end of this process, after the Second World War, the realist empires are gone, and you now have ideological blocks. And the ideological blocks are not designed. They're not thinking along realist lines. The most realist contingent in the West are the British during the Cold War. And very often the British have to grease the rails between the Americans and the Soviets. And the French too. The French are very realist, and they also know what's going to happen. They also know maybe you should not undermine our empires, America, because we're holding shit together here. Thank you very much. But the Americans can't do that. The Americans are too ideologically committed to their republic and to a very juvenile understanding of the revolution. And you get the culmination of it. You want to know why? I remember this. George Bush and Vladimir Putin got along great. They liked each other. They had a great time. The moment when our relationship with Russia starts to deteriorate is when the West starts to complain about how a female punk band is treated in Russia. The punk band's called Pussy Riot. They're awful. They're not even a good band, right? Like we threw away our relationship with Russia for a bad punk band. But it was Obama being like, I don't think that you should whip these women because they peed on in the Orthodox Cathedral of Moscow. And that's what they were doing. They were going into churches and peeing in the churches, if not on the altars. And then Putin's like, well, okay, I'm not interested in. I'd like to be friends with the West, but I don't think that progress means letting our children be groomed by Trans Story Hour. And I also don't think that ultra radical feminist punk bands deserve should have get out of jail free cards. And because of this, the retards in the form of Obama were like, oh, this Putin's a bad guy. And then the CIA then decides off the back of that, realize it has some momentum, and we can start Maidan, we can start a color revolution in Ukraine, and you get this point where it's not a joke, right? Like there's a lot of truth to the we're supporting Ukraine because of gay marriage, right? Like that. There's a lot of truth to that, I think. There's a lot of truth to realpolitik as well, like them nudging it. But the problem is, I don't think a lot of people are thinking about the realpolitik. About it's also like why push Russia that hard? The problem is you have like the girl boss diplomacy, slay queen. Oh, stick it to Putin. He's just pale, stale, and male. And it's like, I genuinely believe a healthy percentage of Canada, UK, Australia, America's diplomatic corps is operating on Zoomer morality, Zoomer global homo morality. And it's like, Jesus, help me. Like, they want to play nuclear war chicken over identity politics. So anyway, that process, that's how you get. And so the communist, does that answer your question in a long way about Latin America?
It kind of opens up even more questions, though. Like, where does why does this shift happen? Did the Western world become so ideological rather than
I think it's because
kind of,
America never needed to be realist. America
okay.
had, you plop some Anglos down on what is essentially an uninhabited country with lots of natural resources, and they have space to expand at the peak of their cultural understanding of themselves, and they can just blast out, and they can assert themselves in so quickly and in such a way that they never have to be realist about anything. They can just by the time they beat the Confederates and secure the American economic system, the Civil War is fought for economic purposes to keep the South's cotton and natural resources inside of a trade tariff barrier system in order to make the economic industrialized North thrive economically. That's what the American Civil War is about in 30 seconds. Once they do that,
Darko also says
they're off
that
to the
it's
races
because they watch too much TV.
Yeah, but I know, but those you think about those simple. I get the joke, I'll take it. I'll take it seriously.
No, but I think there's something to it.
But
I look at television programs and movies that come out of America.
They're idealized. Yeah, but that idealization is something that Americans like because the idealization in that media pre-exists itself in the form that I'm talking about. It TV reinforces it, but that's not the source of it. And so by the time they have to go over to Europe, they're ideological. They're very ideological. They have no reason not to be ideological. And they look around at Europe and they go, come on, guys, you just need the Constitution. And it's like, shut up. Like, Vivek Ramaswamy, I do not like. Okay, putting it nicely, I do not like, because I keep seeing him go, this is what we're doing here. What Trump's doing is about the new world against the old Europe, and we're fighting the globalists they just represent old Europe and tyranny that was European, and I just want him to. I'm not gonna say, but like it's just a retarded take. It's just so stupid. Absolutism in Europe does not exist until the 17th century. Absolutism is foreign to the European, as foreign to the European as it is to the American. And it's an innovation that's propelled by, I suspect by some Gnostic influences that actually propel America anyway. I think America, if you trace the intellectual lineages, America is probably, the Founding Fathers come more out of an absolutist line than they do out of the Cromwellian line.
Is that also a future Bucklander lecture series?
Yeah, potentially. It has been asked of me.
Yeah. Sensible Zoomer also had a question. How do we get our regime to return to the 4D chess foreign policy like Kennedy leaving Khrushchev in power by understanding nuances? So basically, getting past ideology.
I don't know. I don't know that there is a corporate culture of that in any NATO the diplomatic corps of any countries in NATO, I don't know if any of them have that corporate culture to fall back on, to remember. I think the girl boss rot has pretty much set in across all of it. I think you'd have to go through a whole set of domestic upheavals before you even can address the foreign policy at this point. Like Trump and Pompeo pull out of the IRBM agreement that I mentioned at the beginning. Trump is not a realist. Trump is just as much in this ideological team as anybody else. Boris Johnson is just as much an ideologue as Tony Blair. Trudeau is stupid. What's his face? The Albanian, Anthony Albanese in Australia. Albanese, right? He's an Albanian. His family's Albanian that moved to Italy, then moved to Australia. So he's not very smart either. The New Zealand is so stupid that they've been cut out of the Five Eyes, the intelligence sharing agreement. They're so dumb that the dumb people have said you're too dumb for us. Because they're just like, hey, CCP, can we bend over anymore for you? It's crazy. I don't know what to. Foreign policy is a secondary set of considerations for us right now. We can't. Rome is burning, and we're worrying about Rome's foreign policy with the Parthians. I don't really care about. I don't know how you begin to worry about the Parthians when Rome is burning.
But don't you think that Trump, coming from the business world, at least he knows how to navigate personal relationships and sometimes put ideology in a secondary role?
Maybe. I'm not pro-Trump. I'm pro-Trump insofar as like, it will be funny. It will piss off people that I don't like. And he's better than the alternative. But I'm not positively for Trump. I don't see him as any better, really. I don't see him as any less involved. It's not okay. Oh, he's less involved with the globalists. I don't know, bro. Fucking sorry. The funniest story one of the funniest stories I heard was that Netanyahu, before he was prime minister, would when he came to the U.S., he would crash at the Kushners, and that Jared Kushner had to sleep on the couch because Bibi would sleep in Jared Kushner's bedroom, and that somehow all the bullshit we're putting up with is because Jared Kushner's mad he had to give his bed to Netanyahu. Trump's son-in-law has very close family connections with Netanyahu. You pull at a few threads of Trump, and he's just as much a problem as anybody else. He's part of that the King John line of descendants, Jeff. You know what I'm talking about, right? How all but Martin Van Buren, every president has been descended from King John.
Right.
He is, as you put it, I suspect that more than anything, Trump is the light candidate. He's a little token to us. I don't think anything's going to change because nothing changed in the 4 years that he was president. He didn't drain the swamp. I hope he wins. I hope he wins because it will be funny. This is the thing. This is the thing I now say. If we have to live in the shittiest timeline, please just let it be funny. God, please, just let it be funny. And Trump winning would be funny, and that's why I'm pro-Trump. But you pull in enough strings at Trump, and there will be just as much, degrees of separation from what's her face, Abramovich. He's buddies with Epstein.
Yeah.
I'm not holding my breath. I'm not like optimistic about Trump. I'll tell you what I am optimistic about. I'm optimistic about Greg Abbott and Biden starting the second American Civil War, because that's what we got to hope for. Because if America fights a civil war and it cannot mess up the rest of the world has a chance of making itself better. So
Hey, we're gonna have to shut the stream down now because we're getting into dicey territory.
Yeah, sorry, Jeff. I should have looked at my CIA approved notes.
Yeah.
Next episode is the future, the hope. It's the last tragedy of Tragedy and Hope, the last chapter of Tragedy and Hope. And on Friday, I'm going to be doing sort of an overview of the Canaanite and Minoan civilizations, which are two civilizations, not one. It's not the Canaanite and Minoan civilization. I'll be leading those separately. So don't forget about that. And yeah, let's remember when they're coming for you, they are coming for you. So remember to always keep your rifle by your side. And we'll see you next time. And it'll be Monday. It's definitely going to be Monday next week. So yeah. All right.
They'll look everywhere we go. But when the sinners find us, we won't hide.
They'll come loud and they'll come fast.
But we shoot first and we can last. Keep your rifle by your side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. So we'll take a stand, 'cause we must protect our land. Keep your rifle by your side. They'll come day and they'll come night. They'll have our children in their sights. But if they don't have faith, their eyes are blind.